James, it's an absolute honor to have you with us here at Wharton. We genuinely really appreciate it. You've had an incredible career spanning your time at McKinsey, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, and now Walt Disney. But today I'd love for us to touch on three themes: some pivotal moments in your career, your approach to leading through change, and most importantly, the lessons to the next generation before we open up to Q&A. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me, thank you.
Awesome.
I haven't got a choice now, have I? Kind of stuck. All these people came. I wasn't sure which James they came for, though. Dean James has served on our board, or what was our board. I'm now a retiree, with great distinction. So you folks are lucky to have her.
Amazing. Well, to start off with, I'd love if we could start with your time at Morgan Stanley, where you championed this pivot towards a wealth management business. At that time, there was some level of skepticism and resistance towards it. How did you realize that that was the right direction to pursue and navigate the internal and external challenges associated with it?
You mean skepticism by the guy who went on TV and said I should be fired? Or the analyst wondered aloud on a call, why is this guy doing this job? I mean, so you've got to, if you're given a position of responsibility, your job is to, conduct yourself to the best of your abilities. And my view was that the pure global balance sheet intensive investment banking business had failed. And my evidence was pretty complete. Drexel had disappeared, Kidder Peabody, E.F. Hutton, Shearson, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Salomon Brothers, now Credit Suisse. So almost all of the industry disappeared either before or during the financial crisis. So given that reality, any student of business would say, what do we need to change? It's not working. The remaining pure investment banks that were global were Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. The others were inside large commercial banks like JP Morgan, Bank of America, et cetera. So both Goldman and ourselves became bank holding companies. So we took on the artifice and the regulatory requirements being banks, but it was up to us to decide whether actually to do anything about it on the business side. So I was just responding to the reality the industry had failed, therefore you better change yourself or the next time it fails, you'll be gone too. Right. And the obvious path forward, it seemed to me, was if you're going to help move capital for governments, for sovereign wealth funds, for institutions, help manage, originate, distribute capital, why wouldn't you do it for individuals? What was the difference between a wealthy family or even moderately wealthy family and buying and selling stocks and bonds and putting together portfolios than it was for an endowment or a foundation? Obviously, the answer is that there is no difference. It's exactly the same function. So take advantage of that function, built upon the same research, the same pipes, the same trading capability, the same technology, and build out the wealth and asset management sides of the business. And I thought with that would come an asset-light, much more durable business to complement the enormous trading and banking businesses that we had and continue to have, and well over half of the firm. So it was sort of a completely rational decision, and the people who criticized it were of the view that it wasn't going to work, and I said, well, that's their opinion. I have a different opinion.
Right.
Or, there are things that in the early days that didn't go perfectly, and but you've got to, if you have a view, you've got to stick to your view. You can't be pushed around by the critics in the absence of fresh evidence that your view was wrong. Opinions are not evidence.
Sure. I think on that note, it's really about having that view and pushing forward. I think a lot of students over here, undergrads, MBAs, really think about having a strategy and then executing upon that strategy. And you have a distinguished philosophy with 3 sheets of paper that allows you to really build that forward. Would you mind shedding a little bit more light on what that strategy looks like and how it helps you align with your short-term and long-term goals?
Well, it's not really, it's just a tool that I use because all of us get caught up in the day-to-day minutiae of life. and we get dragged from this class to that class or this meeting to that meeting, and you never get to stop and actually think. And so the short-term stuff is you have to deal with it. You got to arrive at class on time. You got to have your books, your computer has to be charged. You got to be ready for game time, right? So short-term minutia, getting up on time, eating the right way, getting some exercise, turning up at class on time. You got to manage all of that stuff. But every now and then you got to sit back and say, what am I trying to, I'm analogizing to your situations, what am I trying to do with my career here at the Wharton School? What am I trying to learn? What are the disciplines that I'm most engaged with? Who are the professors who most energize me? And what kind of careers could that lead to? And that helps you shape your courses as you get through your friendships, your clubs, the job interviews you do. And then the longer term is, what am I really trying to do with my life? Am I trying to simply get a job to get a job? Or am I trying to change myself? Or am I trying to change something else? So the analogy is no different. Whatever you're doing in life, you've got a tension between getting stuff done every day, getting a few things done every year, and then long-term having a plan. And in running a business, my 3 sheets of paper, every night I wrote down all of the numbers for all of our businesses, their revenues every day. So every single day I knew exactly what Morgan Stanley's revenues were in all parts of the world and all major businesses. Did I need to know that? No, but it made me feel like I was in control. And when I saw things that were out of line, either too big sometimes or too small, I could send out emails and it kept me in a very intense daily routine. But at the same time, once a year on first week in January, I'd come into the office and on a blank sheet of paper, write down 10 things I wanted to get done this year. And that was I actually had them in the car for a different reason. I was reading them on the way down here. And that made sure every year you got some meaningful things done. For example, sell the physical commodities business we had. We had a shipping business. I thought banks owning oil transportation businesses, post-financial crisis, with the capacity to have an Exxon Valdez oil spill was not a good look. Mm-hmm. Just a view. So I said, if we then, cause some huge catastrophe to the environment, having already been part of a catastrophe for the economic environment, anything could happen. Get rid of it. So I gave myself 12 months to figure out how to get that out of the building. And the third sheet is just a description of the long-term strategy of the company, so everything is pointing more or less in the same direction. Maybe a different slope of the gradient you're on, but you're generally moving from bottom left to top right. So it's the challenge that we all have of toggling between the immediate, getting things done over a reasonable period of time, and having a long-term view of where you're trying to land. If you don't have a view of where you're trying to arrive, you probably won't get there.
That's honestly very, very insightful. On that note, you mentioned about students. And Morgan Stanley, as you're well aware, has attracted a vast amount of junior talent, even from schools like Penn and Wharton, with a lot of us over here interning or going to intern here. On that note, I'm sure you've seen differences between generations as they come through. What are some characteristics that you admire about the most recent generations? And what are aspects that you encourage them to work on as they prepare to step into the workforce?
I don't know that there are sort of explicit differences between generations, at which I'm taking your question to mean, every 4 or 5 years kind of generations. Like over a 30-year period, yeah, things have changed a lot. I think, when I came to the US, the film Wall Street came out with Michael Douglas. Ivan Boesky, the character, played that role and gave that speech about greed is good. And I read something about it the other day that, it disgusted half the world, but the other half thought, okay, I'm heading to New York. I want a piece of that. So we're in a very different cultural, economic, and social environment now from then. And society, at the end of the 60s, with the end of the Vietnam War and the Iran hostage crisis and the oil embargoes and inflation, was very different from the 80s. The 80s was sort of a response to that. So I don't think students come along differently. I think students reflect the environment in which they've been students. And if society is prosperous and you're growing up in a prosperous environment, you will approach things with a greater sense of both entitlement and also expectation. And I think, this country has actually thrived, at least since I've been here, it seems to me, and become more prosperous, there's more opportunities. So the students today spend more time almost reacting to that prosperity by saying, but what about the rest of society? What about the other issues in society? So I think there's more concern for what is going on outside these buildings than what it was 20, 25 years ago. In terms of skill set, social skills and the ability to engage and communicate are extremely important and not fully valued. And most of us many people tend to introvert versus extrovert, more introverted, and we rely upon our academic capabilities when what helps you get through life is a combination of the complete human being, IQ and EQ. And I would say, if anything, that trend has got exacerbated by the amount of time we spend in front of screens rather than simply communicating and debating issues with friends. So that's the one thing that I'd like to see. The competence is there to do the work. That's, if anything, it's just got better and better, and it's more global, so more smarter people are coming to places like this. But the social skills have got a little worse, would be my judgment.
Interesting. And you mentioned
To take a whole society and put it by one, among my own two children, they would violently disagree with me.
You mentioned about stepping outside of the building. And if we step outside and think about the financial industry service sector as a whole, over the last decade or so, we've seen a lot of change. And that's been primarily driven by client complexity, regulation, and technology. How do you think these three segments will look like at firms like Morgan Stanley in 5 to 10 years, for instance?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if AI is... I just don't know how much AI is really going to change our life. I think I have a view. I don't know if the dollar is going to remain the reserve currency. I think it will. I don't think we're going to use machine learning to replace all the analysts that came into work, but some people think. So at the moment, I think I try and approach major shifts in technology and human behavior incrementally, which sounds counterintuitive. I'm not about making bold pronouncements and bold position taking on things that you simply are not knowable. It's what Donald Rumsfeld once said, who was, I think, Defense Secretary. There are known knowns, things you know and can quantify, and there are unknown knowns. There are things that we know are going to happen, we just don't know what it's actually going to do. And then there are, I think he made it even more confusing, he said there are unknown unknowns, and it's basically things you don't know, but he was Defense Secretary, so it sounded smarter. So I really don't, I don't know. I think we've got to be constantly investing in new technologies and constantly surrounding yourself with people who have provocative and different ideas and being open to change. So I don't have the answers.
It's very valid. I think you mentioned about shifting per se. And when we think about Morgan Stanley, they've had one of the most successful and smoothest transitions of leadership change. For you particularly, how do you ensure that the culture remains intact even after that leadership change occurs?
Well, you can't ensure it. You hopefully build culture not by dictate, not by telling people, you shall think this way, you shall behave this way. They may do that for as long as you're around, for self-preservation. Whole countries behave that way sometimes. But that's not sustainable. How you create culture is by articulating the values that are important to you and demonstrating authentic leadership by living by them. And if if you have values and articulate them and live by them, certain people who share those values will be drawn to your institution, and people who don't won't be. That's fine. I don't want everybody to want to be drawn to Morgan Stanley. The world doesn't need that. The world needs people to be drawn to lots of different endeavors. So the culture of the institution will sustain itself if it's built on strong values. And I believe it is, and I think the new leadership, Ted Pick, who replaced me as CEO and recently as chairman, embraces those values, as do the presidents and the other leadership.
You mentioned about chairman and the title of CEO, and you were chairman for almost your entire CEO tenure at Morgan Stanley. But now you're moving to a position at Walt Disney where those roles are separate. How has that adjustment been, and what are aspects of both roles that you enjoy?
Well, my first 2 years at Morgan Stanley, I was CEO and I had a chairman. The next, I think 12 years, I was CEO and chairman. And the last year, I was chairman, executive chairman. And now at Disney, I've just been named the chairman. I think it's completely different roles. I mean, when you're CEO and chairman, you are responsible for everything, including managing the board. When you're executive chairman, you're responsible for nothing but one person on a sort of daily basis and managing the board, but one function. When you're non-executive chairman, you're really responsible for the board. So I describe it as the CEO's job is to run the company, the non-exec chair's job is to run the board, but to be available for the CEO on any topic that they want help on, and obviously to feed back to the CEO what the board feels and thinks about different issues. So you're a conduit. There's got to be, you can't have 10, 12, 15 people all coming at a CEO with their own point of view. That doesn't work. That's not functional. You need some hierarchy, and the non-exec chair is sort of first among equals, if you will. Their job is to represent the view of the board, provide feedback on issues to a CEO, gather information from the CEO, and work those two things, so the pathways remain clean. It is not to run the company. It's not to engage yourself in the day-to-day activities of the company. And some chairmen do that and do it with poor consequences.
That's insightful. I want to pivot towards students per se. And just having conversations, a lot of undergrads, MBAs in the room, we really think of success being some sort of moving target, where it's something that continues to change and evolve. Based on your experience, how should young professionals think about success? And how has that definition for you changed over time?
It's very personal. I mean, depending on your family circumstance and background and what life gave you or didn't give you, perhaps being the first person to go to college in your family is success for life. But you've got to sort of, we don't approach success or failure from the same conditioning. We approach it with different advantages and disadvantages. And I think what matters is you find what is purposeful to you. I don't want everybody in this room to be an investment banker. That's not, society is not going to benefit if there's only one career which everybody wants to do. In the world of finance, there are a million different careers, right, that are interesting. I happen to think investment banking provides enormous career opportunity, wealth management, portfolio management, and so on. But I want people to find what ultimately you reach a point, probably in your 20s, where you stop listening to what everybody tells you you should be. It's a very dangerous word, should, right? And you start listening to yourself of what do I want to be? What makes me happy? Not what makes those who are saying with this label, if you work at Morgan Stanley, therefore, I can talk about my child at dinner party and be proud of them. What if the child's unhappy?
True.
There's much more to it than just what the job title is or what they got paid, or it's the complete human being. We're all going to be dead, and we're dead for a long time, right? So it's what drives your self and your authentic self, which is what I've tried to encourage my kids to do, and anybody who comes to me for mentoring and stuff. It's not, success of itself defines itself in, that's like outcomes. It's more trying to be the complete human being that you can be.
That's honestly very deep. I really appreciate that. On that
Not
note,
what you expect from a banker, right? We're going deep, people.
we go on a more personal level, and we think about leadership. It's something a lot of us try and hone through various experiencises, extracurriculars, and endeavors. But for you, how do you define your leadership philosophy? And what are key experiences or mentors who have helped really shape that?
Well, firstly, it's to embrace what leadership means. I think, the primary job of a leader is to make decisions. You have a soccer team and the captain says, this is the way we're going to play. You're going on a hike with 3 friends, you come to a fork in the trail, we're going to go left, we're going to go right. You make decisions. Decisions have consequences. Took the wrong trail, the right trail, whatever. And consequences are judged. You spend the night being lost in the woods, or you get back to your nice cabin, have a cold can of beer, everything's going well. So a lot of people want to be the leader. Not many people like the consequences being judged because then they can get criticized. And a lot of people don't like being criticized. They want the good bits of leadership, which is, I got to decide. They don't want the bad bits, which are sometimes you're wrong, and even if you're not wrong, you're judged to be wrong, and people say unpleasant things about you. By the way, word to the wise, if you ever get in a public leadership position, and there are articles written about you, which I've had in my life literally thousands, not exaggerating, never read the comments section. You click on the little button for comments, and it's like, oh my God, there's 482 comments. You think, whatever, I'll read a little bit, see what's going on. And these people say these horrible things about every possible aspect of you, your brains, your beauty, your lack of beauty. And you've got to remind yourself that as an unhealthy human being, and all they have is a computer in front of them, right? And do not engage. So anyway, just a little lesson. So the first part about leadership is being prepared to own the decisions and being prepared to accept that you'll be judged. The second is to be, my philosophy is, I am who I am. It's exactly the same talking to you, talking to this group, as I'm talking, as Erica would tell you, to the board of directors at Morgan Stanley, or I was on the board of the Federal Reserve in New York for 6 years. I'm exactly the same person. I am who I am. I don't really care that much if people want me to be different. I'm who I am. And that's your authenticity needs to come through. Your values as the person that you are, not the person that people want you to be. And not everybody has to like you. Not everybody has to want to be you when you're a leader, but they have to respect you. And they're much more likely to respect somebody who is themselves rather than somebody pretending to be something else.
And you must have had a journey to really reach that kind of state. If you think back to your incredible career, is there anything you would have done differently given everything you know now? Or would you continue to stay the same? We don't get a control thing in life. We don't know what it would be like if I'd stayed. I was a young lawyer in Melbourne, Australia. If I'd stayed in Melbourne, Australia, I certainly wouldn't be CEO of a global company. That much I'm positive of. If I'd stayed at McKinsey & Company, I was, a partner and doing well, and I loved my colleagues and my job. I thought it was very interesting, but an opportunity came up, and I took a risk and jumped at it. So you don't get to run. I think you can't. My suggestion would be, don't constantly second guess yourself. You make your life choices, live with them, try and improve the situation you're in, and if it turns out it was a bad choice, change something, get out of it. But don't say, but I should have done this, if only I'd done that. Again, that word should, which is so controlling. So I have no regrets, because it doesn't mean I haven't made mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes, but I have no regrets about them, because that's part of leadership. That's really insightful. To close it off with one final question from the moderated side, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. What's the best piece of advice you received early on that you still live up to and holds true to today?
The best recent piece of advice I got was from a taxi driver in New York. And I was talking to him, and I was complaining about something, and some person, and he didn't know who the person was, and he said, I have some advice for you. I said, what's that? He said, judge with kindness. And that's become my new motto. people do stupid things maybe because not related to you, maybe related to themselves and their own circumstance, and just give people a bit of a chance every now and then, you know? It's rather than being so sure that they're wrong and you're right. So on a career thing, my advice, I don't know if I was given it or I sort of evolved to this, but I always thought my job was to do the job I was being paid to do at that moment. And too many young people and some older people look like when you're talking about their job that they're actually trying to figure out how to get the next job. And there is nothing more frustrating than to have the people work for you appearing to be constantly campaigning or manipulating how to get something better. Sure. The way to get ahead is to do what you're paid to do really well and trust the system. And if the system works, it should recognize somebody who's talented doing what they're paid to do really well and say, oh my God, they're really good, why don't we give them more? And if you're in a world where the system doesn't recognize your talent for whatever bias or lack of capability or whatever, fine, move out, get out of that. But don't be constantly campaigning and looking over the edge of the desk like, why aren't I doing that? Why can't I do more of that? Do the job you're paid to do.
That's wonderful. And that's a great way to close off the moderated section. Can you give James another huge round of applause?